Okay, we're back out on the patio and I'm going to show you a couple of the different pieces that will get assembled together to make the model. And in this video I'll also go over a couple of reminders and tips and tricks for working with some of the different tools and materials that I think you will find useful as you dive into this particular project. I will also have measurements available online for you to work on scaling up and down your materials. So I have my model in flat pieces, and one, this is so that I can show you the different pieces, but two, when I'm not using it, I can just unstack the pieces, fold it away, and then when I feel like making another installation in this little mini gallery, I can pull it back out. So I will just be taping these sections together, but you're going to need two of these sides, and I have two of them right here. And they're basically the inside of each gallery wall. They will be 10 feet tall and 8 inches tall. This is actually a little beam that will be angled, and the roof is just going to set inside of here so that you can take the roof on and off as needed to have access to the inside of the space. So I'm actually eventually going to be cutting this excess foam board off because I realize that it gets in the way when I'm taking photos. Our models are going to be made at a 1 to 12 scale, and what that means is that 1 inch equals 12 inches, or 12 inches is 1 foot. So a 1 inch to a 12 inch. So 1 inch equals 1 foot in our model. So if we want to just quickly break that down, if this height is 10 feet, then it is actually just 10 inches in the model. And the same thing here with this 8-foot wall height, it's actually just 8 inches in the model. So 1 inch equals 1 foot, a 1 to 12 ratio. Okay, and then they're 16 feet across. Again, I'll have these measurements in your video. So we have two walls. We have the back wall, and this is also 16 feet wide, and eventually I'm going to cut this to 8 feet, which is the height of the back of the wall. And then we have a very fancy roof, and this is so that we can get light inside of our gallery. Our roof has beams on it. We're going for detail to try to make these trick the viewer as much as possible when you go to make your installations on the interior. And so little details like beams and lights and framing things out kind of go a long way. And then we also will have a floor, and this floor is made on a sheet of cardboard that I've then just put masking tape over the top of. And so I'll show you kind of how you can do a little bit of that process. I guess it's hard to see it in the sunlight here, but in the images I'll post, you can see how realistic the flooring can kind of trick the viewer. So I'll set those things aside. A couple safety reminders when you're working with your materials is that you always want to start with a sharp blade, and that is particularly true when you're cutting through your foam board. So on your knives, don't forget that the back end will pull out, that you can push your blade out so that just one of the blades is showing, lock it in place, and the back of that handle, oopsie, has that little slit, and it will also show you where you snap and break away. And I try to do this like close to a surface so that it doesn't snap and fly away. So I've got that little dull blade that I want to get rid of, and I can either put that in my sharps container that I've sealed and written on, or if you don't have a sharps container, you wrap it in a whole bunch of masking tape so that you aren't prone to cut someone who's handling your garbage. So we have our sharpened blade, and your utility knife works really good. X-Acto blades also work good. Just the key is a nice sharp blade. Foam board really cuts best with a utility knife or an X-Acto knife. You probably would not want to try your scissors because it would crunch and kind of tear it up. You can still use scissors for the cardboard if you're more comfortable with that. But sometimes if you're just in the zone of working with the utility knife, you might as well keep going. So I've already got all of my cuts made, but I just want to kind of give you some reminders. If you need exact measurements, be sure that you measure from one side and then also the opposite side. So let's say I need a couple half-inch strips. I'm going to put a half-inch mark on the bottom half, and I'm also going to do the same thing on the back half. Put a little mark there and there, and then that way when I go to cut these, I can connect these two dots, and I'm much more likely to line things up than if I just sort of did one mark and guessed. Okay, so because I have more material here, I'm going to lay the ruler on this side of the line that I'm cutting so that it allows that ruler to stay in place. If I had thin little pieces that I needed to cut off of this end, for instance like here, this would get a little tricky to cut. I don't know if you can see that, but my ruler sort of wants to fall. And so a trick is to take a scrap sheet of the same material and just set it right underneath there as you are getting ready to cut. And that will help balance it out. So I line that up. I prefer to stand when I'm working with my utility knife. I get a little more pressure downward than if I'm sitting with my wrist. And put out part of the blade and retract it so it's locked. And then make sure you got everything lined up. And just make one pass through without too much pressure at first. You might be able to get it cut through with 2 passes, or maybe 3. Oh, or something's caught somewhere, a little spot. So I made a nice clean cut there. You'll know if your blade is dull because you'll start to get these little pill marks that kind of catch, and your blade will want to drag a little bit. But it's sort of more dangerous to try to cut through this with full force on the first pass than if you just make a couple shorter passes. Okay. The cardboard, as I said, you can use your utility knife to cut that, or you could also cut a scissors if you feel more comfortable with the scissors. So here's a preview of the completed model, and in the next series of videos I'll talk to you about a few extra steps and different parts of how to assemble this model together, including working on that beautiful floor. All right, so check back in for more.